into November now, and November is typically when we've been doing marsh burning in years past, and of course we're not doing much of anything right now. So I dug back through some of my video archives and pulled out some clips, and thought I'd run some clips together with some commentary. Anyway, I thought maybe I would I'd perhaps do a little bit of a series with this, and do marsh this time, maybe do some grassland, and then see where we go from there. So in terms of location, I've done marsh burning basically from the Delaware coast the whole way down into North Carolina, and basically every place in between. What that marsh has consisted of has been freshwater marsh, salt marsh, kind of in between brackish water depending on the location. Some of it's just been open marsh, some of it's been impounded units that, in terms of the actual composition of it, it's been everything from, very low salt hay kind of marsh to taller mixture of black needle rush, the whole way up to Phragmites. The reasons we've done marsh burning are multiple. The Phragmites I mentioned, we were burning it as part of an integrated control effort to try and eradicate Phragmites, which is futile in large part, as we discovered. But what we were doing burning wise was to try to incorporate the burning with herbicide treatments, one followed by the other, and typically multiple herbicide treatments to try and get rid of it. The idea was to herbicide it, burn off what we had killed, do another herbicide treatment to kill what had come back in, and do that successive times, herbicide, fire, herbicide, and then at a certain point theoretically you wouldn't need to do either, because the herbicide treatments had killed the Phragmites and allowed the native marsh grass, marsh vegetation to come back in. That was the theory anyway, but theory and practice are two different things. I had some other reasons, just strictly from a fire perspective of burning Phragmites. It's a very volatile fuel, which you'll see in the videos, some of the videos, where you're mixed in with with a wildland urban interface, structures, improvements. That's a big problem. And one of the things early on that I got into when I started my FMO job, one of the things that had preceded that was a large marsh fire up in Delaware that burned, I think, 1,000+ acres basically in one evening, and scared the bejesus out of several of the local communities up there, and the refuge that the fire had started on or had burned on to, one or the other. And that jump-started a lot of the effort to control Phragmites in the coastal areas where I was working. Once I got involved in burning a lot and treating it a lot, I came to understand some things about fire in it. It's a monotype. It grows very densely. You'll see in the videos, it'll get up to 10 or 12 feet tall, very dense. It really needs to have dry feet, I used to like to say. The thatch layer underneath of it needs to be dry to carry it. Even a wind-driven fire doesn't do all that well if it doesn't have that thatch layer underneath it. So burning it, while I said it makes it come back, it doesn't eradicate it. burning it, removing that thatch layer, removing everything, will basically prevent a wildfire of any substance for, I found, probably 3 years. I found this by trying to prescribe burn year after year. If you burn it, if you have a really successful burn in Phragmites 1 year, and you try and come back, like I said, we were doing herbicide treatments, you try and come back the next year and do a follow-up burn, it just wasn't very successful, just because there hadn't been time enough to build up enough of a thatch layer to be the carrier. Equipment you're going to see in these videos, well, you'll see our engines, but our engines, are only useful or effective where we have access, and that is often, quite limited when you're doing these marsh burns. Primarily, we use them on the dike roads, the dike roads on the impoundments, or that sort of thing. Where we get out in the marsh itself, where it's it's largely inaccessible, or where we're doing large acreages, what we started using were marsh masters, and that was kind of a game changer for us to be able to get out in these marsh areas to do the ignition and to do holding, put in lines, do holding in areas where there was no other way to get out there. Going out and walking in a marsh in waders, and you'll see in most of these videos we're all wearing waders, knee boots or hip boots, because we're in a marsh. I mean, fire boots aren't going to do you much good when you're wading around in in a marsh, but marsh walking is very strenuous, and to the extent we can get away from that completely, or smash down lines with the marsh masters to facilitate getting people out on foot, that's what we ended up doing, and we ended up with a fairly good method of doing this. Now, what kind of techniques are we using? What we found, like the Phragmites I mentioned, what I found is it basically only burns on a head fire. So to try and backfire through it and maintain some degree of control, which is why you typically use backing fire, or one of the reasons you use backing fire is for that control. That kind of goes out the window with Phragmites. You just can't. You can't effectively backfire through it. So a lot of what we were trying to line up in doing these burns in Phragmites was how to head fire it safely, and that usually meant trying to run it into bodies of water, and so that's what you'll see in a lot of these videos. One other thing we used, not a lot, but where we could, was airboats, and you'll see some video footage of us doing ignition from airboats. That was where we had enough open water to be able to use them. In terms of ignition techniques, we used drip torches where we could do hand ignition. We used flares and fusees where we could do some launching, and we built burn pots, what we called burn pots, which were improvised. We would take a tank, put an electric pump motor on them with a hose, use a high test mixture of drip torch fuel, and use that either off of Marshmaster, or occasionally we would drop it into the well of an airboat and do ignition that way. So you'll see video of that. For some other marsh that was more of a natural marsh, salt hay, needle rush, more what would be a natural marsh. You can backfire through it because fuel layer at the surface where fire will back through it. But those instances I found were getting increasingly scarce, just simply because Phragmites had become such a dominant feature in most of the marshes we were burning. One other method that I used occasionally, if I had the ability, I had the funding and the personnel to be able to do it, was aerial ignition. I think I did 3 or 4 burns in the marsh, I think, using a helicopter. One of those, was a 1,000 roughly acre island that had a lot of it was broken and would have been just extremely difficult to light effectively by ground methods. So I just got a helicopter and burned it from the air. And one other thing to consider, particularly in that instance, was I'm burning 1,000 acres, give or take, within the city limits of Virginia Beach, and to dump that much smoke in the atmosphere, my preference was to be able to do it quickly with the helicopter ignition, get it ignited within an hour or two, get the smoke up and out, rather than trying to do an all day long ignition by ground methods, which is going to make that smoke hang around for a lot longer. And if something, if you had a wind shift or you had an inversion set in, the faster you can get that smoke gone, the better off you are. burning, or we do burning in marsh, is seasonally for waterfowl benefit. So we would burn early in the year to try and get earlier in the fall, to try and get some new growth for the migrating waterfowl. We also burn later in the year, deeper into the winter, before the snow geese migration, for the same reason. And it's not just the state agencies that are doing this. We also have a fairly long history of arson fires. We responded to any number of arson fires, which some were just strictly arson, setting the marsh on fire, and some of it was for that benefit of hunters looking to improve the habitat for their game. I flew one of these arson fires after the fact, and just to see the burn pattern from the air and see how dangerously close one of these fires came to some infrastructure. So what had happened in this particular fire was the fire had been set ahead of a frontal passage, and you can see very clearly the fire burned in one direction ahead of the front. The wind shift line came through, and the fire changed directions and went in a different direction, driven by that frontal passage. That's the risk of not having a professional do this work. So, like I said, what I think I'll try to do here is go back through some of my video footage from years past and try to put together another segment like this dealing with grassland burning, and then we'll see where it goes from there.